They say the Pacific War was a storm of steel, thunderous battles, roaring engines, islands torn apart by gunfire. But what happened here was quieter, darker, more suffocating. Because this was the island where Japanese soldiers didn't just fight, they vanished. And long before historians debated Saipan, before Tinian became legend, before the world remembered the banzai charges and the cliffs of death, an entire Japanese garrison disappeared into a place that swallowed men without sound or mercy. This is the island where 97% of Japan's defenders fell. Not by American bullets, not by tanks or flamethrowers, but by something far older, far crueler, the island itself. A U.S. officer wrote years after the war, "We didn't know we had landed on a battlefield. When we advanced inland, we realized the enemy wasn't fighting us. Something else had killed them first." Imagine that. An army of thousands, trained, armed, disciplined, reduced to bones scattered beneath roots, uniforms half consumed by soil, rifles rusted into silence. This wasn't supposed to happen. Japan believed its soldiers were the most hardened in Asia. Men forged by discipline, raised to embrace death, trained to fight until the last drop of blood dried in their veins. But on this island, their enemy was not America. It was the land they stood on. The island, dense, humid, ancient, was unlike anything the Japanese army had prepared for. A place where the jungle was so thick, a man standing 3 feet away looked like a shadow. The air was so wet that rifles jammed within hours. Mud clung to legs like chains. The nights were alive with insects whose bites carried fevers hotter than fire. And the silence, that crushing silence, hid an enemy more ruthless than any American division. This was not Saipan's cliffs, not Tinian's beaches, not a battlefield where courage meant anything. Here, courage rotted with the bodies. Japan deployed thousands of men to hold this island. A small dot in the Pacific, they believed essential to controlling the region. But what they didn't know was that nature had already claimed it. And nature does not negotiate. Japan told its soldiers, "You will be supplied, you will be reinforced, you will be supported by the Navy." All lies. Because by 1943, American submarines had strangled Japan's supply routes. Convoys disappeared beneath the waves. Ships meant for this island were sunk before they even saw land. And so the Japanese who landed here, brave, determined, loyal, were abandoned without knowing it. They had no fresh food, no medicine, almost no ammunition. But the worst blow came from within. Tokyo still demanded, "Hold the island. No retreat, no surrender." But the commanders on the ground faced the truth every single day. Men collapsing from hunger before even reaching their posts. Entire units paralyzed by malaria. Soldiers too weak to carry rifles. Corpses buried in shallow graves that the rain washed open again. The garrison wasn't strengthening. It was dying. The first killer wasn't the Americans. It was fever. One Japanese diary, discovered decades later, read, "The mosquitoes come like smoke. They take a man's strength in a single night. In the morning, he cannot rise." Malaria hit with mathematical cruelty. It didn't attack individuals, it attacked units. 2 platoons fell ill in a single week. Another lost 40 men before ever seeing an American helmet. Nights echoed with shivering bodies, chattering teeth, men screaming for water, men delirious with hallucinations, men crawling into the jungle and never returning. By the 3rd month, commanders stopped keeping accurate reports. Too many were dying, far too many. By now, the island seemed alive. A predator, roots twisted around bones. Vines grew over helmets. Trees consumed abandoned encampments within weeks. American patrols later said, "It was as if the jungle was eating the war." And in a way, it was. It didn't care for empires, didn't care for conquest, didn't care for flags. It cared only for reclaiming what belonged to it. And the Japanese garrison, once proud, once fierce, became prey at the mercy of a land that had been killing intruders for centuries. By the end of 1944, the Japanese defenders realized one horrifying truth. They were not fighting for the island. They were fighting the island, and they were losing. Dawn broke over Peleliu like the opening of an oven door. Dry, suffocating, merciless. By sunrise, the temperature was already climbing past 40 degrees Celsius, and the Marines advancing inland quickly realized the truth. The Japanese on Peleliu weren't defending a beach. They were defending an underground world. When American intelligence studied the island before the invasion, they believed the enemy followed the same pattern seen in earlier battles. Massive banzai charges, beach defense lines, predictable fortifications. But this time, Japan had rewritten the playbook. General Sadai Inoue and Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had transformed Peleliu into something terrifying. A fortress carved into the island's bones. Kilometers of tunnels, hidden chambers, reinforced steel doors, underground kitchens, medical bays, radio rooms, sniper nests, none of it visible from the air. None of it vulnerable to bombardment. American pilots had dropped over 500,000 pounds of bombs before the landing. Battleships had pounded the island for days. And yet, when the Marines moved inland, they discovered that the mountains still had teeth. The first real horrors came at the place Marines would forever remember as the Umur Brogol, the pocket, the meat grinder, a jagged collection of coral ridges rising like broken knives from the earth. The Marines thought they were advancing on empty hillsides, until the hills themselves opened fire. Machine guns, mortar teams, snipers, firing from invisible slits cut into stone. A Marine lieutenant later said, "You didn't fight the Japanese on Peleliu. You fought the island itself. Every rock was potentially an enemy. Every shadow a rifle barrel. Every ridge a trap. Nothing moved in the open for long." And the Japanese strategy was horrifyingly effective. Instead of dying in waves like on Tarawa, they fought from underground chambers that could only be taken by one method: rooting them out, one cave at a time. Flamethrowers got satchel charges, grenades, dark tunnels where you couldn't see more than 1 meter, caves filled with smoke, fire, screams. It wasn't war, it was excavation. By the end of the first week, the Marines realized something unthinkable. Peleliu would not fall quickly. It would not fall cheaply. It would not fall at all unless they bled for every meter of coral. The heat became its own enemy. Men collapsed from dehydration. Canteens ran dry before noon. The sun turned steel weapons too hot to touch with bare hands. One Marine wrote in his diary, "We drink water that tastes like rust and dead things. We sleep next to corpses because there's no time to move them. We don't fight for victory anymore. We fight to survive the next 15 minutes. Another said, "Tarawa was hell for 72 hours. Peleliu is hell with no ending." And still, the Japanese refused to break. They didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They didn't run out of ammunition. The tunnels kept them supplied, hidden, organized. Every night, the island came alive with whispers, movement, shifting shadows. Every day, new machine gun nests appeared where none had existed before. It was a nightmare without shape or edge. But the moment that haunted American commanders most came when captured Japanese documents revealed a chilling detail. Peleliu was designed not to repel an invasion, but to consume the invaders over time. The Japanese high command didn't expect to win. They expected to bleed the Americans so heavily that progress across the Pacific would slow to a crawl. Peleliu wasn't a battlefield. It was a sacrifice. A deliberate offering of thousands of lives to buy time for the Empire. Back in Tokyo, the phrase whispered through military circles was simple: "Let the rocks fight for Japan." By the end of week 2, it became brutally clear that the rocks were winning. By late September, the landscape of Peleliu no longer resembled an island. It resembled the surface of another planet. Coral ridges shattered by explosives, trees burned into black skeletons, dust, smoke, and the unending echo of gunfire bouncing through the caves. But the most terrifying part was not the terrain. It was the silence. Because the Japanese had stopped fighting in the open altogether. Their commander, Colonel Nakagawa, had issued new orders. Do not waste your life. Make the enemy come to you. And so the Americans advanced into a nightmare made of stone. Every cave was a fortress, every tunnel a death sentence, every ridge a sniper's throne. Marines pushed forward only inches per day. Groups of 10, sometimes 20, were wiped out by a single machine gun that seemed to appear from nowhere. Sometimes a cave that looked abandoned would erupt in fire the moment someone stepped inside. A Marine sergeant wrote, "They didn't fight like men. They fought like ghosts." In the Umur pocket, the battles reached a level of brutality rarely seen in the Pacific War. Imagine being a young Marine carrying a 70-pound flamethrower under burning heat, crawling up jagged coral as bullets shave off pieces of rock around your head. Imagine lighting a cave with fire, hearing screams, then hearing rifles return fire through the flames. Imagine doing that all day, every day, because there was no other way. Flamethrowers became the most feared weapon on the island, so essential that operators rarely survived long. Snipers aimed for the tanks on their backs. One shot, one spark, and a Marine disappeared in a ball of fire. Meanwhile, the men inside the caves endured something equally horrifying. No water, little food, air thick with smoke and heat. Some Japanese soldiers were so dehydrated that when American troops examined their bodies, the muscles had shriveled inward, the skin glued tight to bone. Yet they fought with a determination that defied reason. One Marine medic wrote, "You'd think they were dead. Then they'd stand up and fire." Another recalled, "They were starving, but they fought like men who believed eating was less important than holding this island." And this was the truth the Americans were slowly understanding. The Japanese on Peleliu did not expect to survive. They expected to kill until they couldn't move. Back in Tokyo, an officer had once said, "A soldier who dies killing time for the emperor dies well." Peleliu was the embodiment of that philosophy. But the real horror, the true tragedy, was still hidden in the caves. Because deep inside the tunnels, Japanese doctors continued treating the wounded, even as their medical supplies ran out. Some used strips of their own uniforms to dress wounds. Others performed surgeries by candlelight, using knives heated over tiny fires as makeshift sterilization. There were reports of soldiers refusing morphine so a more seriously injured comrade could have it. There were others who gave away their last sip of water to a dying friend. Humanity and suffering intertwined until they were indistinguishable. As the days turned into weeks, the Americans started encountering Japanese soldiers who could no longer stand. Some crawled on hands and knees to defend their positions. Some were found too weak to lift their rifles, but still clutching grenades. One Marine corporal described a moment he would never forget. "We found a Japanese soldier sitting against a rock. He didn't move. He didn't blink. We thought he was dead. Then he whispered something and died right there." When his words were later translated, they found he had said, "I did not fail my post." Even in death, the defenders refused to break. Despite the devastating losses, the American troops kept pushing, feet bleeding, uniforms rotting from sweat and salt, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Every night they wondered, how many Japanese are left? 1,000? A few hundred? A few dozen? But the truth was far worse. Because in the underground labyrinth, hidden from the sky, there were still thousands of Japanese soldiers alive, starving, sick, desperate, but still determined to fight. And the Americans were about to discover what it meant to face men who no longer feared death. Men who believed dying on Peleliu meant fulfilling their final duty. By October, the 1st Marine Division was unrecognizable. Faces burned black from the sun. Uniforms torn open by coral. Eyes that no longer blinked at the sound of gunfire. hands shaking, not from fear, but exhaustion, the kind that buries itself in the bones. Yet the island still refused to fall. The Japanese were no longer soldiers in the traditional sense. They were shadows in tunnels, whispers behind rocks, silhouettes that moved only when death required it. And the Marines were learning a brutal truth. The enemy was dying, but not surrendering. Every day the Americans cleared a cave, only to be shot at from another cave entrance connected by underground tunnels they didn't even know existed. Some tunnels ran so deep into the island that oxygen barely reached them. Marines reported hearing coughing echoes, signals of life from deep underground, long before they ever saw a defender. The most haunting discovery came during the assault on Hill 200. Marines found the remains of a Japanese defensive position where the soldiers had not been killed by bullets or flames. They had died of starvation. One Marine lieutenant wrote, "They sat in a circle, rifles still in their hands, as if they were waiting for an order that never came." Peleliu had become more than a battle. It was a slow, grinding death, a contest of endurance between two armies pushed past the limits of humanity. Deep inside the Brogel caves, Colonel Nakagawa knew the end was approaching. Disease was ripping through the defenders. Dysentery, malaria, heat stroke. Some men were so weak they could not lift their heads. Others collapsed, trying to crawl to new firing positions. The Japanese diaries recovered after the battle revealed the truth. Many soldiers had not eaten a full meal in nearly 2 weeks. Some tried to chew grass. Others scraped the dew off rocks at dawn. A few resorted to the unthinkable, taking water from the mouths of their dead comrades. But worst of all was the heat. Inside the caves, temperatures reached over 115 degrees, 46 centigrades. A doctor in the 321st Infantry wrote, "The caves smelled of sweat, rot, and death. The air itself felt poisoned. Yet even in this hell, the defenders refused to abandon their posts. When the Americans found Japanese soldiers unconscious from dehydration, they would still reach for their rifles upon waking. Some wrote final letters, never sent, describing their dreams of returning home. One note found in a cave read, "Mother, forgive me. I will die here. I hope you understand why." On November 24th, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa sent his final message to Japan. "Our weapons are gone. Our water is gone. Our strength is gone. But our spirit remains." Then he burned the regimental colors so they would never fall into American hands. Some officers shot themselves. Others stayed with the wounded, comforting them in their last moments. There were no grand speeches, no final charge, no heroic last stand, just silence. And then, like a candle flickering out in a storm, the 14th Division ceased to exist. When the island was finally declared secure, the U.S. military was stunned. Out of over 10,000 Japanese defenders, only 202 were taken alive. The rest, 97%, chose death. Many died from starvation, many from disease, many from refusing medical care so another man could live a little longer. The American troops who survived the battle described Peleliu as the closest thing to hell on earth. A slaughterhouse in slow motion. A place that punished you for breathing. Even the commanders questioned whether the island was worth the cost. General William Rupertus, who had confidently predicted the island would fall in 3 days, was proven wrong in the most tragic way imaginable. The battle lasted 74 days. And for many Marines, the scars lasted a lifetime. Unlike Saipan, unlike Iwo Jima, unlike Okinawa, Peleliu received little attention, little recognition, little remembrance. There were no famous photographs, no iconic flag raising, no president's speeches, just endless suffering on a forgotten island for both sides. The Americans who fought there would never forget the smell of coral dust and blood. The Japanese who died there never had their names returned home. Peleliu was not a victory. It was not a defeat. It was a warning. A dark reminder of what war becomes when human beings are pushed beyond the breaking point. And today, when historians look back, One truth stands above all others. The Japanese defenders did not lose Peleliu. They simply ran out of life.